Alyssa, what's on your radar?
So this past weekend, Americans mourned the loss of 14 United States servicemen and women at the hands of ISIS-K terrorists. The average age of those killed was only 22 years old. Seeing their caskets carried across Dover Airfield was a reminder of the wages of war and what we stand to lose. Innocent, precious American lives. These terrible last 2 weeks should serve as a reminder to American policymakers of the consequences of war making. But if Joe Biden wanted to end forever wars, this withdrawal was the worst way to try to do it. The U.S. is more vulnerable than we've ever been in a decade to a threat emerging from the region. And because of the way we left, the likelihood we'll get pulled back into a prolonged conflict is seemingly inevitable. Obama's CIA director and Defense Secretary Leon Panetta ominously predicted on CNN this past week, saying, quote, "We're going to have to go back in to get ISIS. We're probably going to have to go back in when al-Qaeda resurrects itself, as they will with this Taliban." He added, "I understand that we're trying to get our troops out of there, but the bottom line is we can leave a battlefield, but we can't leave the war on terrorism, which is still a threat to our security." Now, on this program, we've largely agreed that a large, prolonged presence in Afghanistan was not the right move. We've tried that for 20 years. It didn't work. But I've consistently argued that how we withdraw matters as much as when we get out. When the U.S. leaves conflicts, we either remove or eliminate weaponry and intelligence that we had in the battlefield. That's standard operating procedure. The Biden White House failed to direct the Pentagon to destroy American weapons in Afghanistan, leaving the Taliban and other terrorist organizations armed to the teeth for future conflicts. To rattle off some of what we gifted to the Taliban, they are now the proud owners of 33 Mi-17 helicopters, 33 Black Hawks, more than 50 variations of fixed-wing aircrafts, 22,000 Humvees, 155 mine-proof vehicles, 160 armored personnel carriers, 64,000 machine guns, 300,000 assault rifles, 16,000 sets of night vision goggles, and even more. This amounts to more than $85 billion in high-end U.S. technology the Biden administration willingly let fall into the hands of Taliban terrorists. Now, the common wisdom over the last 20 years is the Taliban is a terrorist organization, but it does not pose a threat to the American homeland. They're tribal, they're focused on Afghanistan and interested in killing Americans and our NATO allies in their home country, but not in ours. At best, the Taliban is now armed to control Afghanistan for decades to come and able to withstand any effort by our Afghan allies to take their country back. At worst, the Taliban is best positioned that they've ever been to threaten U.S. interests at home. Beyond the threat of the Taliban, the U.S. lost Bagram Airfield, a massive air base strategically located on the border of Iran and Pakistan and Russia. By letting Bagram fall the way we did, we lost over-the-horizon capabilities to respond to future potential threats. This makes the U.S. significantly more likely to be caught off guard by a future emerging threat in the region and unable to respond to it swiftly. Now, if you've followed the arc of U.S. foreign policy for the last 20 years, you know that policymakers on the right and the left can almost always find a way to justify getting into the next conflict. The pieces are already in place for re-engagement in Afghanistan: a humanitarian crisis, a vicious terrorist landscape, the desire for retribution against ISIS-K, and the open question as to whether a 20-year foe, the Taliban, does pose a threat to the homeland. A coherent strategic departure could have set us on a course to protect our security interests in the region while also leaving the region better than we found it. Instead, we left it primed for decades more of conflict with our weapons, hopefully not to be used against our own people. And I'm still rooting for Biden, because rooting for Biden is rooting for America. But all indications suggest his means by which we are leaving Afghanistan and the desire of fulfilling a political promise may actually put us on a crash course for even more prolonged engagement in the region. We are leaving the region more dangerous than we found it. We are leaving behind a humanitarian crisis. In fact, we are leaving behind Americans. And I fear we've set ourselves on a course to get dragged into another forever war. Kim, I'd welcome your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that we are primed to go back. I mean, I'm a big skeptic of the military-industrial complex. I don't trust any of them. And I understand, like, Joe Biden says we're out of the war, it's over. But I don't trust Joe Biden either and his war record that has spanned decades. So, I think that from my view of it, the military-industrial complex, or whatever you want to call it, has shifted their focus from boots on the ground to an over-the-horizon form of warfare. We still have a war on terror that is still declared. So I agree that I think that this is primed, and in a lot of ways, I wonder if it was on purpose. Now that we've kind of seen the dust settle, I was pretty angry at the original evacuation, but now I'm kind of, after looking at it, thinking maybe this was all by design to leave behind all of these weapons, to leave Americans and even Afghans behind, so that we do have a reason to continue targeted warfare of some kind, or maybe even potential invasion if we get another, real warmonger in the Oval Office. But had this been done correctly, maybe there wouldn't have been that. Had we taken the weapons, had we gotten all the people out, then we would say, okay, it's over.
Yeah, I mean, U.S. war makers are never going to lack for an excuse to go to war. So I don't think they have to purposely leave anything there. They don't even, oftentimes they don't even bother to give us a pretense and say that, well, there was a threat and we struck it. Biden has, consistently been for this over the horizon, as people are calling it, which is basically just means that we can wage war anywhere we want in the world at any time. In 2011, when he was advocating for withdrawal from Afghanistan, then as vice president to President Obama, his argument was, look, we can just have our little counterterrorism operations. We have our drones. We can still wage our war, but we don't need to do it with a massive occupation. And so, yes and no. Like I don't think that this was some ruse by him to leave so that he could justify then going back in. I think he's always been straightforward that, he doesn't want boots on the ground, but he's actually totally comfortable with the United States, waging these basically launching airstrikes wherever they want at any point that they want, and also dropping in, covert teams where they need to.
Yeah, and I think that part of what we're losing in this, of course, they keep pointing to, we're going to have over-the-horizon capabilities, so flying in from Kuwait, Bahrain, wherever, to get there quickly if we have to for drone strikes, bombing purposes. But we did lose surveillance capabilities, which I also think is something we can't lose sight of in terms of, especially as long as there are Americans on the ground, we don't have ISR. We don't have the capabilities to monitor the movements of the Taliban, the movements of ISIS-K the way that we did. So for all the money and time that we put into the region, I feel like we forfeited some of the actual valuable peacekeeping things that we had in place to try to avoid something worse. But, hearing Leon Panetta predict that we're going to go back in, I think that's pretty much where the foreign policy establishment is. And I'll be watching to see what happens next.
You certainly want to. And what kills me about that list that you put up there of all of the weapons and the equipment that was left behind is the cost of it all. I mean, so in 2015 or so, because there was a little less than $200 million missing from Puerto Rico's clean water and clean sewer fund, basically all operations to upgrade the sewer system and the water system in Puerto Rico were halted. Contractors weren't paid. They went years without any upgrades. Then when Hurricane Maria came in, the system wasn't ready. They were without sewer, basically, and running water for like 58 days after Hurricane Maria. 4,000 people died out of that. Certainly some died out of that for less than $200 million. And you look at that list, I'm sure that just those fixed-wing aircraft were a magnitude of that. And so it's just so offensive, the things that we prioritize and the things that we don't. And then the things that we do prioritize, like them, we just leave them there.
We certainly are going to need congressional hearings on how we spent $3 trillion in 20 years, and this is where we are.
Well, thanks, Alyssa. Kim, looking forward to your radar next.